What would you do if the woman you loved demanded an open marriage, only to come crawling back when her affair collapsed? In today's story, you'll witness betrayal, hypocrisy, and the price of playing with love like a game. But here's the twist. The husband doesn't just endure her betrayal. He fights back, reclaiming his dignity and his children's future in the most unexpected way. This is going to be one of the most intense stories yet. Stay with me until the end. You won't believe how it all unfolds. And before we dive in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts with us here on Cheating Stories 7. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to life. Now, let's step into the drama of she demanded an open marriage. Now she wants me back after her affair died. On a Tuesday like any other, Melissa set 2 mugs on the counter and said my name in a tone that made the room smaller. 15 years of marriage lived inside that tone. Mortgage payments, midnight birthday cakes, the unglamorous logistics that built a home. I turned from the sink with a dish towel in my hands and knew before she spoke that the next sentence would not fit inside our old life. "I want us to open the marriage," she said. No tremor. The words had been rehearsed until they clicked into place. "I'm bored with the way things are. I want to experience more." I always believed marriage was 2 people standing back to back against the storm. I was not built for multiple fronts. Her declaration swung through the kitchen like a wrecking ball, ordinary in shape, catastrophic in effect. I almost laughed, asked if this was a midlife itch, a mood that would pass after the school fundraiser. But Melissa's eyes were steady. Behind the request, an ultimatum waited like a blank signature line. "If you can't agree," she added, "I'll file. I don't want to, but I will." Behind her, the kettle began to hiss. The sound felt obscene, a domestic machine proceeding as if evacuation orders had not just been posted. I thought of Anna's saxophone on the dining table, Jacob's science project drying on the porch, the calendar crowded with recitals and dentist appointments. Divorce would split more than assets. It would cleave weeks into custody, turn holidays into negotiations, teach our children the shape of goodbyes. "What does open mean?" I asked because it was safer than asking why I suddenly wasn't enough. She had the rules ready. No partners in the house, no mutual acquaintances, everyone tested. The kids don't know. Our families don't know. We don't discuss names or details, stacked together. The rules looked like cables on a suspension bridge, reassuring until you glanced down and noticed the river. "Is there someone already?" I asked. "That's not the point," she said, which was its own answer. I tried to remember the last time I felt chosen, once we reached for each other without thinking. Lately, our touches had the choreography of habit, a kiss at the door, a hand brushed in passing, bodies turning towards sleep at different times. Somewhere between diapers and orthodontist bills, we stopped asking who the other was becoming. Now Melissa stood in front of me as a stranger holding a ledger. I pictured saying no. I saw her mouth close like a door, suitcases on the bed, the raw echo of a half-empty house. I saw a judge I had never met arranging my days with my children. Peace, even rented by compromise, seemed cheaper than that future. "Okay," I said, hearing a stranger use my voice. "On conditions." I repeated her list and added my own. No one in our bed, no overnight vanishing, testing before anything happens. If either of us wants to close this, it stays closed. Melissa nodded with the quick relief of someone receiving keys to a room already furnished in her mind. She looked eager, almost light. I felt heavier than the dish towel in my hands. We stood a long moment in the bright quiet of the kitchen. I searched her face for a tell, a crack that would reveal this was a test I had passed by agreeing. There was none, only efficiency. She squeezed my arm, said thank you, and turned to pour the tea. Later, after drop-offs and pickups and a dinner eaten without tasting, I sat on the edge of our bed. We had rebuilt after smaller storms, missed anniversaries, money arguments, the long winters of exhaustion, but this felt different. Instead of repairing the roof, we had decided to take down the walls and trust the weather not to notice. Melissa came in with a basket of laundry. "This will be good for us," she said, like someone proposing a new paint color. She kissed my temple and left a trace of lavender. The house was quiet. A faucet dripped somewhere down the hall, steady as a clock. I lay back and watched the fan carve slow circles in the air. The rules repeated in my head until they thinned into a vow to lose small pieces of myself by increments. I told myself I had done this to save our family, that temporary peace was worth the price. Even so, as the room settled around me, I could not shake the feeling that I had just signed the first page of a contract whose final clause would not include me. The very night after we agreed, Melissa dressed as though she was late to a life that had been waiting on her. She pulled on a black blouse I had not seen in years, sprayed perfume that turned the kitchen into something that smelled like a hotel lobby. She said a friend from book club was having a late birthday drink, nothing big, back early. She kissed the air beside my cheek, left her mug half full, and closed the front door with a practiced softness, as if she had already learned how to keep departures from waking the house. I put the kids to bed and moved through a normal evening, clinging to the hope that repetition could steady the walls. Dishes, trash, packed lunches. At 10, I texted her, just checking you got there safe. No read. At 11, how late do you think you'll be? The blue bubbles lingered. Midnight arrived with the neighbor's garage door. Lights going dark one by one up and down the block. At 1 in the morning, worry hardened into its other shape. Not fear for her safety, but recognition. Safety had nothing to do with tonight. This was not spontaneity. This was an appointment. Somewhere a calendar alert had gone off. Somewhere the person she used to be before me had stepped back into a room and shut the door. Our rules echoed in my mind, and I understood how rules can work like stage curtains, covering what the audience isn't supposed to see, while the real performance unfolds just behind. At 2, I washed the mug she had left on the counter. Her lipstick lifted into the dishwater, leaving a pale ring where the kiss she had not given me found its place on porcelain. I laughed, a hollow sound with no humor. At 3, the night stretched into a long hallway. I tried to read. The words slid away. I tried a movie, turned it off at the first romantic subplot. Consent offered with a knife at your ribs is not agreement. It is survival dressed in polite clothing. I pictured Melissa leaning in somewhere else, laughing the way she once did when we were new, when possibility still hummed in the air. At 3:40, my phone lit, not a text from her but a banking alert. A small charge at a place across town, one of those neon corners where motels and late bars lean together under bad lighting. My chest went still. At 4, headlights swept the living room wall. Her key turned. Melissa slipped inside, shoes in her hand, her mouth shaped into the practiced smile of someone who had already filed away the story she planned to tell. "You're up," she said. I didn't answer. "Where were you?" I asked, and my voice made the most ordinary question sound foreign. She shrugged. "It ran late. We lost track." Her lie was so simple it didn't need details. I didn't ask names. I didn't ask for explanations I would never believe. I said we should try to sleep because morning would arrive whether we were ready or not. She nodded, grateful to be spared the scene she had rehearsed arguing against. In our room, she put her phone face down and went to the bathroom. Water ran. The perfume in the steam was sharper than lavender, the scent she wore around me. In the dark, side by side, we pretended to be a couple trying a complicated experiment. But experiments require curiosity, and what stood between us was something else. Melissa's breathing soon settled. I stared at the ceiling and felt the house tilt toward a future I had not authorized. The agreement already felt like a document with my signature forged in familiar ink. By morning, the details had hardened into the kind of truth that does not need verifying. She had not needed time to explore. She had needed permission to continue. The speed of it all didn't just wound me, it rewrote the story. I was not a partner in adventure. I was a signature she had collected to make the life she wanted technically correct. At breakfast, Melissa poured coffee, asked about Anna's rehearsal and Jacob's project. She looked capable, even cheerful, the way someone does the morning after a party that mattered to them. I answered like a husband fluent in logistics. The children argued about the bus. From the outside, we were an ordinary family beginning an ordinary day, but inside, a fracture had opened. It would not thunder yet. It would spread quietly, the way cracks travel through glass, until one day the entire pain gives with a single touch. The morning after Melissa's first night out felt like waking into a life that had been quietly rewritten. She stirred creamer into her coffee and asked if Jacob had packed his homework, as though she had not vanished until dawn. I answered on autopilot, my lips moving while my chest carried a hollow weight. The children bickered over cereal boxes, oblivious to the shift in the ground beneath us. From the outside, the family machine still ran. Inside, its engine had cracked. I told myself this was the price of survival. If agreeing to her arrangement kept us under one roof, then endurance was cheaper than collapse. I repeated the logic daily, better a father present in silence than absent in righteousness. But logic did not tuck me in at night. Loneliness did. Melissa began to vanish more often. She called them book club nights, catching up with a friend, errands. The words mattered less than the hours they swallowed. By the second week, I was cooking alone most nights. Anna practiced her saxophone in the living room, Jacob scattered Lego castles across the rug, and I drifted between them with a ladle in hand, pretending to anchor the routine. Pretending became its own second job. At work, I wrote code with fingers that moved automatically, my mind replaying the emptiness of her side of the bed. Colleagues asked if I was tired. I nodded instead of saying I was hollow. I carried the secret like an infection sealed beneath the skin, nothing visible, everything poisoned. At dinner, Melissa sometimes breezed in late, her makeup smudged, her eyes lit with a brightness I no longer recognized. She would kiss the kids, set her phone on the counter, and ask how the day had gone. The children rushed to tell her their stories, eager for her attention. I listened to her laughter spill across the table and wondered who had placed that light in her voice. Not me. Not anymore. I convinced myself not to ask questions. The rules had been written. I had signed them with my silence. Each night I lay awake, listening to the ceiling fan's steady pulse, trying to believe my sacrifice carried value. The more I surrendered, the more she consumed. This was compromise at its cruelest form, where one partner bleeds quietly so the other may feast openly. Yet something shifted in that quiet suffering. Pain sharpened me. It taught me how to mask, how to measure, how to wait. What began as surrender was becoming something else, though I did not yet see its full design. I thought I was preserving a marriage. In truth, I was laying the first bricks of retaliation, stacking them one silent night at a time. The auditorium smelled of brass polish and cafeteria pizza. Parents shuffled programs, cameras flickered like fireflies, and children in crisp uniforms tuned their instruments with uneven pride. I sat alone, Melissa busy with friends, her empty seat beside me another silence in a row of chatter. Anna's saxophone rested across her knees, her eyes darting toward the curtain. I lifted a hand to reassure her. That was when a woman 2 seats down offered me a quiet smile. She had the look of someone who knew how to wait, shoulders relaxed, gaze steady, her presence calm in the noise of the crowd. Rachel. Her daughter held a clarinet behind the curtain with the same nervous focus Anna carried. We exchanged polite nods, a few words about our kids. Her voice was low and even, the kind of tone that made conversation feel safe. After the concert, parents mingled in the parking lot, voices rising in cheerful goodbyes. Rachel lingered near her car, not rushing to leave. I thanked her for sitting nearby. It had felt less lonely. She laughed, the sound tired but genuine. Single-parent nights at school events are always long, she said. I corrected her gently. I wasn't single, married but complicated. She nodded with recognition instead of judgment, as though complicated was a language she already spoke. In the weeks that followed, our paths crossed again. Band fundraisers, carpool rosters, a field trip that demanded volunteers. Conversations stretched into something warmer, stitched with small disclosures. She told me about her divorce, about years of raising her daughter without promises of permanence, about the relief of no longer pretending things were perfect. When she asked about me, I found myself saying more than I meant to. The open marriage, the rules, The hollowness, she didn't flinch. One evening after a late rehearsal, she suggested coffee at a quiet diner. Fluorescent lights hummed, the booth smelled of sugar and grease. I expected small talk. Instead, we slid into honesty, the kind usually reserved for people you've known much longer. She told me she didn't want another husband, didn't want chains or fairy tales. Just connection, she said. Something real, even if temporary. Her words stirred something in me I thought had gone numb. Melissa's freedom was conquest. Rachel's was clarity. Melissa consumed, Rachel listened. The difference was so sharp it frightened me. When her hand brushed mine across the booth, I felt guilt try to surface, only to dissolve into something else, relief. This wasn't breaking rules. It was existing inside the very system Melissa had created. And yet my heart whispered what my mind already knew. Consent signed under duress is never true freedom. Intimacy followed slowly, naturally. Not fireworks, but the steady warmth of a door opening. Her apartment was cluttered with books, a quilt half-finished across the couch. Rachel kissed me without pretense. No ledger, no game, just touch. I froze, waiting for guilt to crush me. It didn't. Instead, I felt something loosen, as if years of silence had finally exhaled. Driving home later, the streets blurred under the yellow lamps. Betrayal clung to me like smoke, but so did the undeniable sense that I had touched something genuine. Melissa's rules permitted it. My vows condemned it. I lived in the tension between both, a man both guilty and permitted, betrayed and betraying. Rachel became more than a release valve. She was a mirror, reflecting what tenderness without cruelty looked like. She reminded me that affection was not supposed to come stapled to control. That knowledge was dangerous, because once you taste kindness, it becomes impossible to starve yourself with excuses. The first time Melissa touched me with real hunger again, it startled me. For months her body had been elsewhere, her laughter carried by someone else, her nights claimed by shadows she never named. Yet suddenly, in the wake of my quiet entanglement with Rachel, she reached for me as though possession itself could sew the seams back together. Her kisses were urgent, her hands restless, and the bedroom became a stage for a performance that felt too deliberate. I wondered if she could sense something, that the fire she rekindled was sparked less by affection and more by rivalry. For a short while, I almost convinced myself the arrangement might have merit. Our intimacy roared back, fierce and unpredictable, as if absence had sharpened desire. Melissa laughed louder, lingered longer, and in front of the children the house seemed lighter. But I knew better. Love was not fueling her. Competition was. She thrived not when we were equal, but when she believed herself victorious. With Rachel, I found calm. With Melissa, intensity edged into volatility. I began to see the pattern. Whenever I seemed at peace, Melissa stirred chaos. She returned home earlier, hovered near me in the kitchen, her questions wrapped in sweetness while her eyes interrogated. At night, she whispered about stress at work, about my tiredness, probing for cracks. Her touch was both affection and surveillance. The cruel irony was that the very act of finding solace elsewhere had, for a moment, patched our marriage with counterfeit stitches. To anyone looking in, we were rediscovering each other. But I could feel the hollowness. Passion was not a cure. It was a flare sparked by jealousy, a performance staged so she would not lose ground. Some nights, lying beside her after our bodies collided with a force that felt more like combat than connection, I stared at the ceiling and asked myself if this was victory. Was this what saving a marriage looked like? A cycle where desire was sharpened not by love but by fear. The balance was dangerous because it was never balance at all. It was a teetering scale, Melissa pressing down harder each time she sensed me lifting away. And though the house still stood, its foundation trembled. Even in the laughter, even in the wild intimacy, I knew collapse was not a question of if, but when. Melissa's affair ended without fireworks, only the quiet thud of something dropped and broken. She never said his name, but I would later learn it was Chris, the old flame who had pulled her into this experiment to begin with. His absence showed in the small details. She came home earlier, her phone face down on the table for longer stretches, her laughter brittle as though it had lost its source. What had once been her triumph now soured into resentment, and the target of that bitterness became me. At first, her scrutiny crept in softly. Questions wrapped in silk, where I had been, why my shirt carried a faint perfume, why my eyes looked distant. She spoke as though concerned, but her gaze burned like a searchlight. It was not care she was offering, it was accusation without confession. Then came the breaking point, Rachel. The irony stung like salt in an open wound. Melissa had dragged me into this arrangement, demanded I comply, and yet the moment she discovered Rachel's presence, her composure fractured. She did not scream right away. Instead, she staged her outrage like theater, her voice a low poison. "So this is what you do with your freedom?" she asked one night, her tone deceptively calm. "You bring a stranger into our lives, you dare humiliate me like this?" The rules, her rules, suddenly shifted into weapons. Where she had once dismissed boundaries as flexible, now she wielded them like sacred law. She claimed Rachel was too close, that her presence at school events violated the purity of our agreement. I reminded her of the night she disappeared mere hours after demanding we open up. Reminded her that she had never cared for boundaries until they threatened her control. Her voice rose sharp enough to cut. "End it now, or we're finished." The hypocrisy burned hotter than her fury. It was not about fidelity. It was not even about Rachel. It was about Melissa losing her grip, about power slipping through her fingers. Her lover had vanished, mine still stood, and imbalance was unbearable to her. In that moment, the truth I had tried to bury finally stood clear. Melissa's version of love was never about partnership. It was about dominance. She could forgive distance, forgive lies, even forgive betrayal, as long as she remained the one dictating the rhythm. But the instant I found solace in a place she did not control, she unraveled. Sitting across from her, watching her tremble with rage disguised as righteousness, I felt something inside me shift. The ache of betrayal cooled into clarity. This was no longer marriage. It was battlefield. And Melissa was not seeking connection. She was seeking victory. The truth revealed itself in fragments, each one too small to matter, until they snapped together into something I could no longer ignore. Melissa always seemed to know where I had been, down to the minute. At first, I told myself it was intuition, or maybe coincidence. But then her questions carried details she should never have known. She mentioned the street with blue shutters near Rachel's house. She asked about a corner cafe I had never told her about. The unease gnawed at me until one night, while she slept, I checked her phone. My blood turned cold. She had been tracking me through location history, each step recorded, each visit logged. In her timeline were the coordinates of my nights, my conversations, even the short detours I took to breathe before coming home. She had followed me, parked a block from Rachel's house, watched me walk inside. Infidelity had been one wound. This was something darker. This was violation. I felt stripped of privacy, no longer a man in his own life, but a subject in Melissa's private experiment of control. The final blow came when Rachel, her voice trembling, told me about an encounter at school. Melissa had cornered her under the guise of being a concerned wife. She had painted herself as the victim of a reckless husband, carefully sowing doubt. Every word was designed to fracture what little trust Rachel and I had begun to build. Shame burned through me, not because of Rachel, but because I had allowed Melissa's manipulations to reach into yet another part of my life. Rachel deserved honesty, not to be dragged into the chaos Melissa had crafted. When I confronted her, the storm broke. She did not deny it. In fact, she turned the accusation back on me. "What else was I supposed to do?" she snapped. "Watch you sneak around while our marriage crumbled." Her eyes were wild, triumphant, as if stalking me was proof of devotion instead of madness. Something snapped inside me then. I had endured her ultimatum. I had lived with her affair. I had suffered her hypocrisy. But this was different. This was war disguised as love, manipulation wrapped in the word marriage. That night, staring at her across the room, I finally stopped making excuses. I no longer saw a wife who had lost her way. I saw an adversary who would weaponize anything, our children, our vows, even technology, to keep me tethered. And in that realization, something inside me hardened. My patience had died. What replaced it was resistance. Quiet at first, but steady like the gathering storm. Melissa chose her moment carefully, as though she were staging a performance instead of opening her heart. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, she sat across from me at the kitchen table. Her hands folded neatly, her voice calm in a way that felt rehearsed. "I think it's time we close the marriage," she said. "We've both experimented, but it's tearing us apart. If we want to heal, it has to end." On the surface, her words sounded reasonable, even hopeful, but I couldn't ignore the timing. Her affair with Chris had collapsed months earlier, leaving her empty-handed. Meanwhile, Rachel was still present in my life. This wasn't about healing. It was about reclaiming control. I leaned back in my chair, studying her carefully. She looked like someone already holding the conclusion, waiting only for my agreement to sign it into reality. "All right," I said slowly. "I'll agree to close it, but only on two conditions." Relief flickered across her face, too quick, too eager. "First," I continued, "we close it permanently. No more ultimatums, no more reopening because you're bored or restless. If it ends now, it ends for good." She nodded fast, almost too fast, as if she had already prepared to accept that part. But when I laid out the second condition, her mask cracked. "And second," I said, my voice firmer now, "you sign a legal document waiving spousal support if we divorce." Her eyes widened. "What? You've been a stay-at-home mom for 15 years. I've carried the bills, the mortgage, the future. If you want to recommit, fine. But if you betray me again, you don't get to take half of what I built while you were out living your fantasy." The air between us thickened. She slammed her hand against the table, the sound loud enough to echo through the silent house. "You want me to sign away my life? You want me and the kids to starve if you decide to leave me?" "No," I shot back, my voice rose sharper than I intended. "I want fairness. I want accountability. You demanded we open this marriage, and I went along even though it shredded me. Now you want to close it only because you lost, and you expect me to keep carrying you while you move the goalposts again. Not anymore, Melissa." Her face twisted, rage and panic blending into something venomous. "You're threatening me. You want me dependent on you, begging for scraps." "That's rich." I cut in, bitter laughter catching in my throat. "You're the one who threatened divorce if I didn't give you what you wanted. You dangled our family like a weapon. You don't get to play the victim now." The argument exploded into shouting. Months of unspoken accusations tore free, hurled like knives across the table. She called me cruel, selfish, heartless. I called her manipulative, hypocritical, destructive. There was no reconciliation hidden in the words, only the wreckage of a marriage already stripped bare. When silence finally came, it was not peace. It was the exhaustion after battle. Melissa stared at me, her chest rising and falling, her eyes sharp with fury but clouded with something else too, fear. She knew she was losing control. For me, the moment was clarifying. Her plea for healing was a mirage. This was never about love. It was never about family. It was about power. And for the first time in years, I wasn't handing it back to her. The therapist's office was painted in muted tones. Grays and creams meant to calm, though nothing could steady the storm between us. Melissa sat stiffly across from me, legs crossed, her hands folded too neatly in her lap. She was rehearsing even in silence. The counselor, a middle-aged woman with kind but unflinching eyes, invited us to speak. "Melissa, let's start with honesty. Ethan feels there are still truths hidden between you. If this is to work, everything has to be on the table." Melissa hesitated, her jaw tightening, her gaze darting toward the window. Then, with a sigh heavy with false resignation, she spoke. "It wasn't just anyone, it was Chris, my high school boyfriend." The name hit me like a stone to the chest. In that instant, the scattered fragments of late nights, secret smiles, sudden ultimatums, all of it snapped into place. This had never been exploration. This had been a reunion she had craved for years. "Chris," I repeated, my voice flat, brittle. "So 15 years of marriage, 2 children, a home we built together undone because you couldn't let go of a teenage fantasy." She flinched but didn't retreat. "You don't understand. We had unfinished business. I needed closure. I needed to know what it could have been." The therapist leaned forward, her voice steady. Melissa, do you hear what you're saying? You risked your marriage and your family for nostalgia. That isn't closure. That's avoidance. Avoidance of the real problems here between you and Ethan. Melissa's defenses rose higher, her words sharp, her tone urgent. You think I did this just for me? I thought maybe if I got it out of my system, I could come back to Ethan whole, like it was something I needed to purge. I laughed bitterly, the sound startling even to me. Purge. You call years of betrayal a purge? You call dragging me into your scheme, forcing me to agree to something that hollowed me out just so you could chase a memory, healing. Her eyes flicked toward the therapist as if searching for rescue, but the counselor didn't let her escape. Melissa, you didn't just explore. You manipulated Ethan into agreeing to something you had already decided to do. That isn't partnership, that's coercion. For the first time, Melissa looked small, her posture shrinking under the weight of those words. But instead of remorse, I saw only resistance. Her silence was not surrender. It was a shield. Something inside me shifted then. My anger no longer flared hot. It cooled into clarity. Melissa hadn't betrayed me because she was lost or searching. She had betrayed me because she wanted what she wanted, and nothing, husband, children, vows, was sacred enough to stop her. The session ended with polite words, but the air between us was ice. Walking out of that office, I knew with certainty trust had not just been broken, it had been erased. And once erased, it could never be redrawn. The betrayal I thought I had already endured, her affair, her stalking, her manipulations, paled compared to the night my daughter looked at me with eyes burning with accusation. Anna was only 13, but in that moment her anger carried the weight of someone twice her age. She stood in the doorway of my study, fists clenched, her voice trembling. "Mom told me everything," she said. "About you and that woman, about how you've been sneaking around. How could you do this to us?" For a moment I couldn't breathe. I had braced myself for Melissa's hypocrisy, her venom, her rage, but not this, not my own child seeing me as the villain in her story. "Anna," I whispered, rising slowly, "what your mother told you isn't the truth." She shook her head violently, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Don't lie to me, Dad. She showed me messages. She said you abandoned us for someone else. She said you broke our family." The knife twisted deeper with every word. Melissa hadn't just betrayed me. She had dragged Anna into the battlefield, handing her poisoned weapons and painting me as the enemy. It wasn't enough for Melissa to control me. Now she was rewriting me in my children's eyes. I pulled open a drawer where I had kept records, not because I had planned to show them, but because I needed them for myself during the nights when Melissa's gaslighting made me question my sanity. Hotel receipts showing her absences, calendar timelines from work, screenshots of the agreement she had written the night she demanded an open marriage. "Anna, look," I pleaded, spreading the papers on the desk with shaking hands. "Your mom wasn't honest with you. I didn't betray her. She was the one who asked for this. She was the one who stepped out first. I only tried to keep everything from falling apart." Her eyes darted over the papers, confusion flashing across her face. For a moment, I saw the flicker of a daughter who wanted to believe me. But Melissa's venom had sunk too deep. Anna wrapped her arms around herself, turning away. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she whispered before leaving the room. When the door closed, silence pressed against me heavier than any argument Melissa and I had ever had. I sat back down, burying my face in my hands. For years, I had endured her ultimatums, her betrayals, her manipulations. But this was different. This was unforgivable. She had sacrificed our children's trust to shield herself, turning them into pawns in a war they never asked to fight. In that moment, something inside me hardened permanently. I no longer cared about salvaging the marriage. I no longer cared about winning arguments with Melissa. What mattered now was Anna. What mattered was Jacob. Protecting them from being poisoned further became the only battle worth fighting. The role of husband had already been reduced to ash, but the role of father, I would not surrender that. Not to Melissa, not to anyone. The night Anna looked at me with her mother's poison in her eyes, something inside me died and something else was born. I had bent, compromised, endured, but no more. Melissa had taken the final step, turning my own daughter against me. If she wanted war, I would no longer fight defensively. I would strike back. Her affair with Chris had lingered in the shadows for too long, a secret I had protected out of shame and a misplaced instinct to preserve what little dignity our family still had. But silence had cost me everything: my peace, my trust, even my daughter's belief in me. Silence was no longer an option. I found Chris's wife easily. Her social media painted the picture Melissa had helped destroy: family vacations, smiling children, anniversary dinners, the illusion of permanence. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for one last second, doubt whispering whether this was cruelty or justice. Then I remembered Anna's trembling voice, the tears in her eyes, the lies Melissa had placed in her hands. My hesitation evaporated. The message I sent was not vague. It was explicit, detailed, irrefutable. I laid out the timeline, attached receipts, screenshots, the fragments of evidence Melissa had left behind in her arrogance. I told Chris's wife the truth her husband had buried, that he had been rekindling an old romance with my wife while she believed her marriage was intact. The response came within hours. One sentence that cut through the night like a blade. "Thank you for telling me. He will never set foot in this house again." The fallout spread quickly. Chris's marriage imploded in real time. Whispers traveled among mutual friends. Melissa's phone lit up with furious texts and thinly veiled pity from people who now knew what she had been hiding. She stormed into the living room, eyes blazing, her voice sharp enough to cut. "What did you do?" She hissed. I didn't flinch. "I gave the truth to someone who deserved to know it. You don't get to burn down my life in silence while hiding in the dark. Now the fire touches you too." Her rage was volcanic: screams, accusations, threats hurled like knives. But beneath the fury, I saw it clearly for the first time: fear. For years, she had held the strings, manipulating, controlling, twisting the story. Now, for the first time, she was exposed. I felt no joy in watching her unravel, no triumph in seeing Chris's family collapse. But there was a grim satisfaction, a balance restored. Melissa had turned betrayal into a weapon, had poisoned my children against me, had painted me as the villain. Now, finally, she was forced to taste the venom she had so eagerly poured for others. Whatever fragile hope of reconciliation might have lingered was gone. With this act, there was no return, no patching the ruins. What remained between us was not marriage. It was open war, and the battlefield stretched everywhere: our home, our children, our reputations. I had taken my first step into retaliation, and there would be no turning back. Melissa's fury came in relentless waves, each one louder, sharper, more desperate than the last. When she realized Chris's wife knew everything, she didn't accuse me of cruelty or vengeance. Instead, she twisted the story with breathtaking audacity, claiming I had violated the sacred confidentiality of therapy. In her version, I was the betrayer. She was the victim. Not once did she acknowledge her own affair, her lies, or the poison she had poured into our children's ears. The house became suffocating. Silence spread like smoke in the hallways, not peace but toxicity thick enough to choke. Meals were no longer shared. I ate at the kitchen counter. She hid behind the bedroom door. Even Anna and Jacob carried the weight, their shoulders tense, their movements cautious, as if afraid of triggering another explosion. Every word Melissa and I exchanged was sharpened, weaponized, left hanging in the air like ash after a fire. It was in that silence that I understood a truth I had been running from. Melissa was no longer my wife. She was my adversary. The woman I had once trusted with my life now stood across from me as someone I had to defend myself against. Every glance was suspicion. Every silence was a threat. The line we had crossed was invisible but absolute. That was when I called an attorney. The conversation was clinical, stripped of emotion: custody, division of assets, waivers, spousal support. I laid it all out: the open marriage, the manipulation, the stalking, the lies, the way she had turned our children into pawns. I explained that stability mattered more than appearances, that Anna and Jacob deserved a home not poisoned by war. The lawyer listened quietly, then outlined a plan: what evidence I would need, how custody battles were fought, what protections could be secured for the children. As she spoke, I felt something shift inside me. The ache of betrayal still lived in me, but beneath it rose something steadier. Resolve. This was no longer about punishing Melissa. It was about reclaiming my life. It was about ensuring my children would not grow up inside a house where silence was a weapon and love was a currency traded in lies. The marriage had died long ago. I just hadn't admitted it. Now, finally, I could see the corpse for what it was. And in that devastation, in the ashes of everything I once believed sacred, I found my quietest revenge. Control, not the kind Melissa craved, rooted in dominance, but control over my own choices, my own peace, my children's future. When I left the attorney's office, the air outside felt sharper, cleaner. For the first time in years, I wasn't struggling to save something already lost. I was fighting to protect what still mattered. The war with Melissa was far from over, but in my heart, I had crossed the point of no return. And in that crossing, I had finally chosen myself. And so the story of she demanded an open marriage. Now she wants me back after her affair died comes to an end. What began as an ultimatum turned into betrayal, manipulation, and finally, the husband's quiet revenge, taking back control of his own life. This story leaves us with a haunting truth. Betrayal always has a cost, and sometimes that cost is everything. If you were in his place, what would you have done? Would you forgive, or would you fight back? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay connected with us here on Cheating Stories 7 for more unforgettable stories of love, lies, and revenge. Until next time, thank you for watching.